Hi folks, welcome to today's color process video. Today's comic was a fairly tricky one to color due to the nature of the line work. Typically with my comics, obviously I tend to go for a far cleaner look to my work with the way they're inked. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to, like say a character's face, it allows me to select the area within the contours, the outer contours of the face, expand the pixels, and then just fill that area with color. However, when a comic is rendered in the way today's is, where I did it almost entirely using a HB pencil, what that leads to is basically the entire piece is covered in line work, like all the shading that is on the piece, that's line work. So it makes it next to impossible to color the piece in the way I would typically go about things. So with this, it was basically a matter of just laying down some like flat colors underneath the pencils, and due to the nature of the pencil work, when you lay colors down underneath that, it all going well, it kind of does all the grunt work for you, the penciling, where like the texture and the shading of the pencils that kind of gets incorporated into the color and vice versa. So it means that all going well, you actually don't have to do all that much work when it comes to like doing shading and whatnot, because the pencils do a lot of that work for you. And that makes it sound like it's easy. It's just a matter of slapping the colors down underneath and leave it at that. I wish it were so, but it's very much not the case. Um, for example, if you look at the first panel, I have it here in front of me, just look at it now. And if you have it maybe open in another tab or something, like just take a look at it there. And the way the pencils were done, whereas everything else in the comic has fairly defined edges, in that panel, due to the nature of the light coming through the window, I very much wanted it to have this like soft kind of look, and almost like the not almost like I did want the light to kind of bloom around the edges of the window or the opening. And yeah, it came across fairly well in the pencils. However, when I added color to that piece, just like laying down flat colors, it immediately just became an unreadable mess. No longer did it look like this weird thing looking out a window. It just looked like it didn't look like anything. So that took a bit of extra work where I had to use a paintbrush style tool to kind of just gradually uh, add like a gradient between the light streaming through the window and the color of the walls. And took a it took a bit of effort to get that looking right. Like I was actually worried for a bit that it wasn't going to work, and I was considering just not coloring the comic, just posting it up as line work and leaving it at that. However, eventually, it felt very much like hammering a square peg into a round hole, but I got it done. I got it done in the end, and it's not perfect. I think it could have looked a bit better, but in the end, it looks fairly close to what I needed it to look like. And then for the rest of the comic, it was a matter of just like touching up things a little. Like if you look at the third panel, for example, one thing I wanted to achieve in this comic was to give it this almost dream-like atmosphere where it's like something half remembered when you wake up. And as a result, I wanted everything to have this like hazy kind of effect. And something I tried, and it resulted in something I didn't actually intend, was I added like a gradient to the sky, going from dark to light. And it looked fine, but I thought it could have done with a bit more lightness at the bottom. So I did that. I did that. And what that resulted in, which I didn't actually intend, but it added to that hazy kind of atmosphere I was looking to achieve, was due to the shading on the building and the color of the front of the building. Like if you look at the shading on the side, it's like it starts dark at the top and gets lighter and lighter and lighter as it comes to the bottom. That coupled with the lightness of the sky in the background, it creates this almost this mist-like effect. Like there's like a low mist hanging over the ground. And yeah, I've talked about happy accidents before, and that this is very much a good case of that. One final thing I want to talk about that I kind of felt like hammering my head against the wall at times was the last panel, and this was not due to the coloring of the panel itself, but more due to how I kind of messed up drawing that panel. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the panel, you can see that there's like all the kind of foundation lines are still there, and they weren't meant to be. That wasn't an intentional thing. Because what ended up happening was when I drew that panel, I drew it in. I did the foundational lines with blue pencil, the typical blue pencil that I would use from my other comics, and then I did the final pass of pencils with the HB pencil over that, and that was fine. It helped me get that panel done quicker than and in a less messy form than if I had have done with the HB pencil. However, one thing I forgot is that blue pencil and traditional pencil don't work very well together when it comes to digitally removing blue pencil, as I do with all my comics. Because what ends up happening is any area where there is blue pencil, when you remove that blue pencil, it's like it's like you literally have just like cut those areas out of the page, and that leaves you with all these like these white lines all over the image. And it was something I tried to fix manually, but it just wasn't working because like there's so much shading on the page that even trying to erase like one single line, it would just leave this big ugly white mark in the original shading. So in the end, I decided to compromise, and I just took a grayscale version of the original scan and planted that down on top. And I decided in the end that while leaving the foundational lines in wasn't what I wanted, it was the lesser of two evils. Um, and I was hoping that maybe that dreamlike atmosphere I'm going for, that like being able to see the foundational lines will kind of add to that somehow. I may be wrong, but hopefully that's the case. Um, and like, I mean, coloring the panel itself was fine, but just that was something that it really annoyed me. I'll be honest. And once I had colored the panel, I did again attempt to remove those foundational lines. I thought maybe I could even just color in the line work, but again, it it was similar to when I just tried to delete the foundational lines. It just left these big, ugly, obvious marks um, on top of the image. So I said, no, I'll leave them in. One final thing I did that you won't see in this video is, and if you look at the final comic, you'll see what I'm talking about. Is I just added like a black background to the page rather than the typical white. I did consider giving the page like an off yellow kind of brownish look to almost give it the effect of like aged paper, but it just didn't sit well. It didn't look right. So in the end, I just trying things out. I decided to pick color drop like one of the darkest areas of the line work and just add that in as the background. And yeah, it turned out quite nice. And an unintended effect of that was there were still chunks of color from the panels that were like seeping out over the panel borders, and it gave it on top of the black. It gave it this kind of almost glowing kind of effect, almost this kind of ghostly kind of effect. However, the colors were like those colors that went over the edges. They were, while they did give this kind of glowing effect, the edges were too harsh. Um, so what I did was I took the color layer and I simply added a blur filter to that layer, a fairly heavy blur filter, and obviously, I mean, the clue is in the name. It blurred all those edges, and it added to that kind of ghostly glowing effect that came across originally. And yeah, again, it's kind of one of those like little happy accidents that I think kind of adds to the comic. So I think I've talked enough about this one, so I will leave it at that. And thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you at the next video. Take care.